I need to try to get out these ideas while I'm having the spark of reconsideration. So I go through seasonal emotional changes and intellectual changes, which is another reason why I've considered gravitational field mirages and not just, well, a bear wants to sleep in the winter, right? Supposedly. And so it's not just like birds flying south. And maybe we do have altering and changing electromagnetic field flux in our atmosphere. That's another issue with this, which I think can technically be reduced down to gravitational field mirages. But there's so much to think about and consider with this theory that while I'm having the spark for it again, that I need to get it all out, because this is definitely worth pursuing. While it's all fresh again in my brain, I need a catalog. So I went over how simply driving over a bump can so subtly change and become more of an aggressive bump, and how we would rationalize the difference, right? So how do we further this? Why are we looking at, gravity as associated to my gravitational field model, and how that correlates between mass effect and energy effect, well, mass and energy equivalence, and a probabilistic structure for time-derived theories of correlation between gravitational field flux, and like, we need to consider the hologram thing, the whole like, if you, which is still a little bit of like a hokey science until you really start to understand how or what they mean. And see, I'm gonna get myself off topic again. I can't keep this consistent. There's just so much to keep inside all at once. And what I wanted to explain further was potentially how our nerve structure and our nervous system and precognition and postcognition of processing and data in our brains, that we can still, how to try and further that with microtubules, and where consciousness originates. So in my theory, where consciousness originated back whenever I came up with something called quantum wave cancellations. And I'm looking at salt right now. I'm literally just like looking at salt. My brain will do this. I'll be like in a completely different thing. My eyes will go somewhere. And people think I'm staring at their ass, and I'm just like, my brain is in a different realm. My eyes are just looking at center of mass. Anyway, so with quantum wave cancellations and how, so I would say that where consciousness originates is quantum wave cancellations in the neural receptors of the brain, and that means that certain, if you kind of think of it like eddy currents in a way, but not eddy currents entirely, but more like fuzz in an electromagnetic signal, that our brains are encountering that, and electrons are flowing in a wave structure through our body. All our nerves, everything, I mean, our skin in general creates pulses, and the pulses amplify or they reduce, and that's essentially just why all our muscles pull, but they're actually pushing. Anyway, you have to get into the gravitational field model to understand why everything's actually pushing. So I guess that's a force. People want to argue against that, but whatever. Anyway, that's still a very new concept, that everything's one plus. Nothing's actually divided. Everything's a redirection of additions. And I think that maybe where I originated the concepts for spherical matrices to conceptualize gravitational forces to try and further the theory, and it's very strange to basically come at it as if. See, when Einstein came up with relativity and how to create grid structures and relativistic theories and looking at different dimensions, he invented that shit. It's not easy. And it takes a long time because your brain is literally being retaught by yourself all these things. And they wanted to lock me up in a hospital because I questioned time dilation. Anyway, people are nuts. But, so spherical matrices, I don't want to get into that right now and how that all works and how to calculate curves with spherical matrices, because it's really complicated and confusing, and I still haven't perfectly worked it out. I tried doing it on CAD software, and we'll still see, because I know it's still a brilliant idea. I mean, it's a great idea, because nothing's straight, and standard models of mathematics and calculus use straight line grid structures to create curves. Well, why don't we just use curves? It's a way to make math easier for people, is what I always hoped, so that you're not stuck thinking like other people, even though you do have the potential. I mean, you can do the math. It's just you got to find the system that works for you, and that's always an opportunity as well. But trying to talk about quantum wave cancellations. So how amplitudes and collapsing wave functions, which I've never understood the standard. People say, when does the wave function collapse? And they're like, well, at the vector. I don't understand. Like, you're encountering all these forces, and like. So, what they're saying is that potentially, if quantum wave cancellations function to create consciousness, then that means that we're creating new vectors, and there's always these new vectors of what stimuli can create, and so you're potentially going to have something that here's your base axis. Here's your, is it vortice or vortex? Vortex, right? Vortex is 0, 0. So you have your amplitude here and this here, and if they overlap, then they become 0, and that is the collapse of a wave function. But what about something like this that's doing weird things like that, and you're having this constant input bias that is your neurons are amplifying and reducing? And so with microtubules, you can have a series of neurological inducing stimuli that can be amplified or reduced, also not only by like the volume of the circle itself. Also, you have like your skin can expand and reduce in size, and that if you look at that, like humidity, or humidity and like relative humidity and temperature and stuff in your brain though, trying to correlate this and create analogies. So I'm not trained in neuroscience, but so that's happening. Like your neurons are also shrinking, expanding apart, and you have these quantum waves cancellations. That's the fundamental, is where these waves function, how they amplify, and they can become longer, more frequency based, and they'll travel faster over longer distances in your neurons and stuff like that. And our brains are just kind of doing this whole just series of this chaotic. It's not even chaotic. It's not chaos. It's just that the math is so complicated that unless you can imagine it, there's a good chance that you're not even going to understand it in general. Because you are that, conceptualizing that, and it's funny, it's funky, it's really funky. Anyway, and so how to correlate that theory of consciousness that we don't even have yet, and how quantum wave cancellations function in our brain. So if you were to look at that separately, and we want to look at how quantum wave cancellations function here within all of our molecules, all of our atoms, and then our cranium, which is kind of like an insulator, and then gravitational field flux that creates this influence upon this, and not just our eyes too, because this is the big problem right here. Our eyeballs are a huge weakness for this, because I'm curious what blind people would say, honestly, at this point. It's harder to communicate whatsoever with somebody that is, what's her freaking name? It was blind, deaf, and couldn't talk. I mean, she couldn't speak languages. I can't think of her name, but she would be really interesting because she learned to communicate. But how could we translate this stimuli-based information to understand and correlate, say, this theory without those other stimuli that she possesses, and or possessed? What was her name? Anyway, and so just trying to further get these ideas reduced. That you have your brain, you have all the funky stuff, and your insulative skull, which personally I believe if we have more copper and aluminum in our diet, can help isolate and reduce the impact of gravitational field fluxes. Gravitational mirages, not fluxes, but the mirage happens in the brain where we can literally see overlapping realities if you're really sensitive to it. And there can be brain disorders too associated with it. We call these brain disorders. How would we differentiate the physics from an actual brain disorder? Would be mapping and actually visualizing, like an MRI. We'd have to see a CAT scan, a visual eye in real time, a visual eye. Okay, I got it. A CAT scan and CAT scan and an MRI, and then you need a way to see three-dimensional gravitational waves, and then we need a stimulus bias, so a way to poke somebody's finger or something, and then so we could find separate people who test fundamentally different, especially with different neurological illnesses and psychological illnesses, to where we could find this fundamental constant to hold a needle closer to somebody, and somebody will feel his pain, somebody else will feel his pleasure. And then we have also that and the numbing of what's per se. So you have all these contradictory psychological studies that would be really difficult to weed out, and how to understand a gravitational mirage to where we can each perceive overlapping realities, in what I mentioned in the other videos. Like I said, I just wanted to get this step out so that I can keep thinking. This is me over the last half hour or hour. I don't know how long. I'll lose days doing this. I'll just think. I'll lose fucking days. I lost 3 days in August. It's the 6th now? I thought it was the 3rd. Yesterday I thought it was the 2nd. So my brain, I'll just think. I'll be lost up there. And it's fun. But it's honestly the only thing I enjoy anymore. However, how sick people are. I read a theory or a study of a guy who was a cutter, and he would cut himself, and so he went to prison and he cut himself really deep that he needed staples, because he already hated life, and then you put him in a prison, and now he went to a doctor, and the doctor stapled him without any anesthesia, any numbing whatsoever. I don't know if anesthesia is the right word. It, like, I wonder if, since I like thinking so much, what sort of a fucking psychotic would like to turn me into a modern Stephen Hawking and turn me into a puppet for them. There's some really fucked up people out in the world. Anyway, I think this is enough